In this episode, I want to talk about shared services, and especially because there are a lot of organizations right now looking for ways to cut costs. And it's something I've been warning about for a while is the decline of our economy. And, you know, most people will promote shared services in a combination of ways uh, in order to reduce costs. And what I almost always find is that when people do shared services, it winds up costing more. And so I've titled this episode, Why Shared Services is a Bad Idea. And, I first talked about this back in episode 42, and I'll put a link down in the description of this particular video in talking about outsourcing and mergers and acquisitions and shared services in that particular episode. And there's really a couple of different ways, a couple different ways that organizations are drawn to shared services. And one of them is just having a central single point of contact for their organization. So in other words, customers calling in, they may have to talk to 6 different departments, and you say, oh, we'll have a single point and we'll put in a contact center for those things, and then we'll have our workflow, and people love the workflow. Often what I find, and having worked in the information technology industry for a couple decades, I can tell you that often just passing it on, having a contact center and then passing something on doesn't work out very well for reasons I'll get into here in a minute. So that's the first thing, is kind of having that central point of contact. And the second thing has to do with the economies of scale. So naturally, and I've worked in a number of mergers and acquisitions, or people, again, looking to combine things. Oh, this division over here has a contact. Oh, and that division over there has a contact center. We'll just put them all together because it's all the same thing after all. Well, it's not. And what I often find is you get diseconomies of scale, not economies. And so what happens is costs wind up going up unexpectedly, even though I'm telling you right now, you're going to expect costs to go up if you don't take the correct steps in figuring it out. And like I said, I've worked on a number of mergers and acquisitions. I've worked on outsourcing types of scenarios where companies are, if I just send it over to this other country where their labor's cheaper, I'm going to save lots of money. You don't save a lot of money. Or if I share these services of these contact centers. So, the mechanics, whether it's because you're doing it because of economies of scale and combining, departments that have the same name, and that's about it, like contact centers, or HR, or information technology, or finance, or purchasing, or whatever that department is, and saying, well, we'll just put them together because it's all the same stuff. Doesn't understand at a level deep enough of why these things too often don't work. And not 100% of the time, but certainly over 90% of the time, this winds up being a disaster. But only if you're looking at the end-to-end costs, which most people don't. Oh, I saved in finance because I combined the finance area, or I saved on these contact centers because now instead of 150, I've got 120 people, answering phone calls. Okay. So let's get into it. First of all, you have to consider that the economies of scale that I talked about, you get diseconomies. So people just think that combining things, they don't have a deep enough understanding. That's the first thing. The second thing is they don't realize what the customer impact is going to be. So if you have a single point for contact centers and you got this workflow, what I often find is, that workflow gets backed up. There's a lot of questions about what's going into the workflow. Remember, IT systems are pretty rigid, and customers, especially in service industries, have to deal with a tremendous variety of interactions that they get on a daily basis, and those interactions then wind up being things that's difficult to transfer in through IT. And so what happens is time goes by before the customer gets their answer back, and they call back in. That's cost, and people are looking at these costs because they're kind of hidden within their organization. So unless you're looking for it, with open eyes and enough knowledge, you wouldn't catch these costs because you're sitting there saying, "Well, I saved 30 people." Yeah, but you're decreased your customer satisfaction, having to call in multiple times to find out the status of whatever it is that went through the workflow process, and then there's also the just the cost of having to write stuff down in order to pass it on to another department, and the back and forth that goes on between departments. And so it gets very frustrating for people working in that system in order to send stuff to their back offices in HR or IT or finance or purchasing in order to get responses that are associated with it. Now on the let's just take a contact center and mergers. That's one of the first things I seem to wind up getting involved with, and that is the contact centers. Oh, we've got contact centers. Look how much money it was in our mergers and acquisitions. This is going to be the money that we save. Well, nobody did any research or anything. They just made a lot of assumptions, and that's where one of the other problems that you run into is the assumptions people make about economies of scale and what they're going to save on something when why we want to buy this company or combine this division with a contact center and this division with a contact and this, we're going to save lots of money. It just doesn't happen. And so this winds up having where you're getting to increase costs and having an impact on the customer. And now here I'm talking, with contact centers, real customers in essence calling in to your contact center and trying to get answers and being told basically, we'll send this back to our finance department and they'll work it and it'll get fixed. And then lo and behold, time goes by because there's backups or misunderstandings or miscommunications that are going on. And the customer doesn't get it. They get their next bill. It's still wrong. They're calling in. They're frustrated. They move on. Again, you've got to be able to look at your system end to end and understand if this is going to flow this way, what has to happen where service isn't compromised. And we're able to, in essence, resolve issues, and the aim should be to resolve it in one phone call. And that's going to cause a whole lot of problems, especially I know with finance. Finance does not like anybody touching their systems. But regardless, these are the things you're going to have to look at in your system end to end. So what's the fix here? Well, first of all, you're going to have to realize that companies are different. This division over here is different than this division, even if they're doing the same thing, because they have different customers in their system. So this customer has different expectations than this customer. And when you just throw them together without understanding what types of interactions are going on between the customer and your organization, it just causes costs just to go up, as opposed to the end where they can see the visible costs that are out there that, I reduced 30 people. They aren't seeing the actual costs of things end to end. So systems are different and departments are different and divisions, it's just all of this stuff is different. And if you're whether you already have shared services or looking into it or thinking about outsourcing, which I don't never recommend, or looking into a mergers and acquisition, you got to go deeper than an inch. you've got to be able to see, how this might play out. I know you may be limited, especially in mergers, but things like outsourcing and sharing services, you have every opportunity to go much deeper into seeing if this even makes any sense, rather than some dictate from the hierarchy in the organization. So how do you go about it? You study your organization customer in, which is where I begin every executive that I coach. You begin with the customer and understanding, not from a spreadsheet or whatever, but listening to phone calls, understanding, you know, are we really the same as this division over here? How do their customers differ than this division over here? If we do a single point of contact, for these other areas and do a workflow, how does that work? And is the response instantaneous, or what problems does it have? And again, any of these things require small scale to see if it works first. That way you can go into it with your eyes open. So those are the recommendations that I have is, you got to understand what that customer impact is when you're, doing shared services. And no organization I've worked with has ever gone through the type of understanding that they need on whether shared services or a merger or outsourcing makes any sense, because they're so focused on the big things that they can see, like economies of scale. Because we'll be able to get economies of scale and we won't need 150 people. Don't go into it blindly. So that's my message this week. And remember, there's always a better way.